Licensed premises in New South Wales must have removed, altered or concealed any gaming-related signage externally. The rules implemented on September 1 are the second of a three-stage process when, by December of 2023, there will be a strict enforcement and zero tolerance for implementation. Well, joining me live is Diane Young, trauma specialist at South Pacific Private and addiction expert. Diane, thank you very much for joining us. So you do deal a lot in addiction. Have you seen these types of bans work, whether it's gambling or smoking or other forms of addiction?
I think in and of themselves they don't work, but what they do is they heighten the awareness within the community and within families. The signage that you relate to, the VIP or the dragon coins or all of that sort of thing, it's an enticement to get people in the door. Whether it actually stops a chronic gambler going into those places and gambling is another question altogether, but it will actually heighten the fact that it's problematic for people.
What is the official definition of addiction?
Look, addiction is where you have no control over whether you're going to continue. Often addicts will say to me, well, I can stop. And I say, well, that's great, but can you stop from starting again? And they might actually even, what we call white knuckle it and not gamble for a few months, but they will actually end up having to what we call relapse and start gambling again. They become very secretive. They do a lot of lying. They often steal. This is when we're talking about gamblers and maybe addicts, alcoholics and addicts. They're financially unpredictable. They'll generally have no real control over it, and their behaviour will start to change. That's usually what families see most of all. The behaviour starts to change, and they repeatedly are doing things and being where they're not supposed to be. With gamblers, and your reference to the self-exclusion laws that have just come through, they'll often be consistently on their phones, and they won't want anyone else in the family to look at the phone. They won't want anybody to see that.
Interesting, isn't it? Because, everything is really at our fingertips, isn't it? Whether it's, again, gambling or if people are online dating or you can get food online, and there's so much just in that one phone. What is the difference between addiction and dependency?
Look, I believe it's all on the continuum of the same. There will be people, I had a gentleman the other day and he believes that he's got a slight alcohol dependency. Now, if he gets into abstinence around that, gets some therapeutic input into that and starts to educate himself as to why that started to happen for him, he may well be able to stop. But if it continued on for very much longer, he would be in full-blown addiction. He'd be at the chronic stage where he would have no control, and he would start to sacrifice things like his family relationships, the job relationships, his careers. So it's a broad spectrum. The early part of dependency, there's a sense of control, but by the time we've gotten through to the chronic stage, there's no control, which is why they end up needing to reach out for help and detoxing in facilities like South Pacific, for example, and other places.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's gambling, the drug, the food, whatever the type of addiction. Is that what you say, a Band-Aid? That's the Band-Aid. It's not the issue. It's what people do. So how do we get to fixing the issue?
Okay, so the first thing that needs to happen for any addict is they need to admit they've got a problem. Now, that in and of itself, when you're not an addict, you can't see the sense in why they wouldn't do that. But it will take them some time to get to the point where they're, what I would effectively say, on their knees and ready to ask for help and ready to take whatever actions necessary for them to get into abstinence. Because for an addict, you've got to remember, they can't imagine a life without the behaviour, as in gambling, or the substance, as in alcohol or drugs, or relationships, which you referred to earlier. They can't imagine a life without that. That is the thing that numbs them and allows them to continue to get the dopamine hit, which means that they can have some sense of joy in their life. If you say to an addict to start getting into recovery before they're actually ready, it's an abhorrent thought to them. They can't imagine it. So the interesting thing about gambling, if I can just say one thing about that, they've done studies on the dopamine, the neurotransmitter that the brain releases during enjoyable activities, it's also known to increase and be heightened when the reward is uncertain. So you can see that in gambling, it's actually whether you're losing or whether you're winning, you're still searching for that dopamine hit. And to your point about the underlying cause, there is, many studies done about people who have had, some sort of childhood trauma, some sort of PTSD, underlying anxiety and depression, and they use the substance or the behaviour, as in gambling, to soothe how they feel. So yes, it is necessary, first of all, to go into abstinence around the addiction and then be able to address the underlying cause and condition. If nobody wakes up... Sorry, go on.
No, sorry to interrupt. So talking about the dopamine then, and often we hear, online, whether it's not gambling, but kids on their devices and so forth, and, just online with Twitter now, X, that, can only have a certain amount of words and so forth. We're living, in a fast-paced world. Are we all, whether we're officially addicted or not, heading in the direction of increasing dopamine and needing to get that high, so to speak, more and more?
Yes. Look, I am of the belief that a lot of what we do online, and as you said, it's 3 clicks to get food delivered to your house or any other number of things delivered to your house. There is a point where we're all getting very, we've got a short attention span, much shorter than we used to have, I don't know about you, Janie. I used to read, 3 or 4 books a week. I'd be lucky if I got through one now. My attention span's even shorter because I'm reading things online. And I do think you're right that children now are being raised and we're interactive. I mean, I was watching something on television and there was a wonderful looking learning to read program. It was all designed to be educational, but it's all on an iPad. So I do think our attention span has gotten shorter. And I also think that, you've only got to look at the number of people that are now asking to be assessed for ADHD, for example, and they're adults who have functioned reasonably well in their lives, and they're actually going through the process because they realise that they can't complete in the way that they used to tasks. And I think it actually may well have a lot to do with that.
It also poses the question, I guess, whether they did have those conditions prior to the new world of, online and dopamine enhanced products or programs. We've just been educated more. So it's, it's a very interesting topic and interesting to see what's being done by governments and certainly the work that you and everybody does at South Pacific Private. Thank you so much. We have to wrap it up there, but Diane Young, appreciate your time and expertise.
Thanks, Janie.
And if this story has raised any concerns for you, you can contact the Gambling Help Online via 1800 858 858.